about transparency, which I think is so key. It's something we talk about a lot at MyArtBroker, and it's something that, you know, I think we're all in the same space of having kind of approached this from a point of view of being collectors yourselves or being within this market before building something. And you know what I think is always really interested me about Ian and Joey, effectively they were collectors themselves, and they kind of looked at the market and went, this isn't what I need. These are the things I need. And you get to the point where you go, I can, you know, as exactly as you said, Christy, like you've been using data behind the scenes for your own use for some time, and then you very quickly realize that's exactly what collectors and clients want more than anything.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so for us, myself and Ross, my co-founder, we kind of came to the industry, I guess, as like what I'd now call kind of amateur enthusiasts, and have, you know, built up a lot of knowledge since, I guess. But, you know, we were kind of interested in the market, but probably came as like relative outsiders. You know, we weren't real insiders in the market, and I think that's been kind of useful. You know, actually, as in the way we've kind of built the company, I guess we'd had a couple of, you know, our own experiences that definitely shaped our approach. And I mean, one of those was just around selling pre-owned watches. So I think buying pre-owned watches is actually not that poor an experience. You know, I think you might pay a bit too much, but, you know, you can get a warranty with it. You can, you know, see some pictures online, you get a returns period, you know, et cetera, et cetera. But try to sell a watch, and it's just, you know, an incredibly painful and tricky and just horrible process at every stage, you know, imaginable.
Where do they go? Where do they go, Christy, if they don't come to you? Like, where are they going to auction to try and do this? Like, where are they going?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess it depends on the type of watch you're looking at, but a lot of them go through dealers, which is kind of mad, right? As a starting point, you know, I mean, that basically hasn't changed for 100 years. You know, 100 years ago, you wanted to sell pre-owned watch, you'd go to a dealer, and like now they've got a website, you know, and improved in all sorts of ways. But fundamentally, the business model is the same, right? And that wave of, you know, innovation that you've seen across, you know, e-commerce more generally, in terms of, you know, marketplaces and everything else, just in terms of watches certainly, but I think, you know, pre-owned luxury goods more widely just hasn't, you know, really come to fruition in quite the same way. So yeah, I think that was kind of our starting point, was going like, look, we feel like we can build a better way of selling a watch, and actually, you know, if you can build a better way of selling a watch, you can get great watches, and if you've got great watches, you know, then, you know, you've got something really interesting there. So yeah, that was our kind of starting point, and I think we've kind of since really focused a lot on the kind of enthusiast and the kind of collector, as opposed to, you know, I mean, we're very kind of broad in terms of who we'll serve, but, you know, I think if you're buying your first watch, or you're, you know, buying one, you know, every 5 years, actually, I think there are reasonably good offerings in the market. I think if you're somebody who's trading really frequently, and actually you're interested in, you know, kind of building community and like learning and everything else, I think that there's very little. In fact, probably the best thing you can find is going to a forum, which are wonderful, right? But they're not particularly, you know, modern in the way they work, which is part of the charm as well. But yeah, so I think that was really kind of the start for us, and yeah, trying to bring transparency to that process, I think was kind of clear from the start.
And I'm curious, like, how do you do your like valuations and data and bring more transparency in? Because I think, especially for art and watches, where they're so unique, right? They're like one of ones, right? Or maybe one of tens, right? You don't have too many comps to be able to create that sort of market pricing. Yeah, I've always kind of wondered that.
Yeah. So I guess it depends on what type of watches you're looking at. I guess the benefit of a category like watches, which I imagine is the same for wine, if not more so, and clearly, Charlotte and Joe, the types of pieces that you guys are focusing on in art, is that it's, it has categories within it. You know, it has some categorization, some standardization. And I think where you have that, it allows you to be slightly more scientific in the way that you're approaching evaluations. There will always be, you know, the kind of super rare kind of pieces that just require a slightly different approach, and require, you know, it's more of an art than a science in how you approach it. I guess our initial you know, approach to when we started looking at this market was to say, look, there's, you know, the way that dealers tend to work is they go, okay, on a transaction by transaction basis, somebody's going to approach us with a watch. We're going to try and buy that for as little money as possible. We're going to pump a ton of money into, you know, a shop in Bond Street and, you know, sponsorship and brand and, you know, all of this. And then we're going to try and sell it above market. So we want to try and get somebody who goes, I'm happy to pay more money than I could pay for this watch because I'm going to get it from, you know, insert brand name here. And so they end up with this kind of like huge gross margin, paying sellers very little, charging buyers quite a lot, this huge gross margin. And then because of paying so much money to try and like, achieve that sort of like above market, you know, pricing power, they end up with like a very small net margin at the end of the day. And I think our initial approach was like, if you believe that you can get, you know, towards, you know, or move towards kind of like perfect market knowledge, you can actually operate more like a market maker, I guess, in this market. And so you say, look, this is the price that we understand. We know that this piece is trading at this price. And so then we can kind of move it very, very quickly. We just price it on market and make it, you know, really on market where this piece is selling. And you can offer a much better price to the seller. You can offer a much better price to the buyer. And your turn times are much quicker and you kind of keep going. And so I think that's how we kind of approached it. And I think you can take a very data-driven approach to some parts of the market for that. From a value perspective, the lion's share of the market. So it's your kind of Rolex, Patek, AP, sort of sports watches. But there is necessarily a kind of different part of the market that requires much more kind of, you know, of a kind of an expert approach. But I do think, and maybe this is an interesting one to community, I do think that community is a really fantastic way of powering that sort of valuations approach. I mean, ultimately, it's the price of something is the price that one person's willing to sell it, another person's willing to buy it. And so, you know, you know, having that community and having that network allows you to, and I think we are driving increasingly more and more of our kind of valuations approach from just that community itself directly. I imagine in wine that's there's a similar sort of kind of standardization and kind of category approach that allows you to kind of be reasonably data driven in the way that you're.
Yeah, I think you know, with wine, right, I think there are so many layers from the producer to the end consumer, right, with distributors or negociants or brokers and retailers. So that's something that we've been able to develop a pricing range for, because obviously the release price is very, very rarely offered to the consumer. But we want to be able to get people that sort of transparency on like the sort of what to expect if you're buying as a merchant versus a retailer versus a consumer. And even the rarest wines, right? There's still thousands of bottles produced every year. So we are able to have those market comps within the same vintage, as well as starting to compare it against similar vintages in the past, right? The good thing is in most years, wineries will produce a vintage every single year. So you have decades and decades worth of price data that we can look to, you know, producing from the same vineyard, right? Same bottle of wine, and be able to reasonably predict what future values also look like.
And is that changing very quickly, or is it reasonably kind of predictable in the way that it's moving and trending?
I would say it's pretty predictable, right? Like the lifespan of wine is pretty similar. The quantities don't vary that much, although in recent years with climate change, the volatility has certainly gone up with the yields and, you know, what's happening with the weather. But because there is so much data, you know, decades worth, as I mentioned, you're able to build a pretty strong model and account for those variances.
Super interesting.
It's not all that different in the prints market. I think, you know, I think this is the thing, like probably people understand wine and watches a bit more than they understand the prints market. you know, the comparables are to exactly what you're talking about. It's just, it's so similar, isn't it, Joey?
Yeah, I mean, the prints market is very much data driven. You know, we've got comparables of different similar works that might have sold privately or through auction, and then it's just about creating a blend for buyers and sellers to try and get them, you know, fair market value. You know, for what we do is very, you know, I'm not sure with, you know, with the wine that you were discussing, Anthony, whether it's, you know, on Premier, if it's new wine that you're trading sort of futures in, if you will. You know, what we sort of do with the prints multiples market is very much secondary markets. So it's all resale. And, you know, as much as for a unique painting, that there will be some sort of specialist knowledge involved and pricing it against comparables, with prints and multiples, it's very much data driven, and that's providing, you know, a blend of, like I say, auction records and private sales. But, you know, to go back to the transparency, what we've seen certainly in the last few years is, you know, where we've really focused on is providing transparency with, you know, vendors and buyers who buy at auction, who don't realise the costs involved, and you know that they're. I'm sure it's the same in the watch and the wine world, but you know, if you sell it buy at auction, the only one that wins is the auction house because of the fees involved. So, you know, we take, yeah, mental. You know, they're taking sort of 25% from each side, which is it's a pound of flesh and some. So where we've tried to position ourselves in the marketplace, certainly in the prints and multiples markets, is, you know, to work with vendors to basically not charge them a fee, and you know, the buyer still pays a commission, but it's less than they pay at auctions. You know, we can provide a much fairer deal for both parties, not to trade at auction, and you know, similarly get sellers a better price, but also get buyers a better price as well. So
you guys, Charlotte and Joe, do you guys have do you have like a very kind of loyal seller who turns up from Bristol with a bunch of Banksies and a hood on and some paint on his spattered on his clothes?
We used to. I haven't seen him for a few years. I don't know where he's
no, where is he? Where is he when you need him most, eh?
No, but no, we listen. We do have a number of. I mean, the beauty about what we do in the Banksy market is, you know, you've got everyday people that have bought these prints for, you know, £50 15, 20 years ago, and they're now worth 50 to 100 grand, and it's a life-changing sum of money. But again, going back to what you mentioned, Christy, about, you know, people that are trying to sell and have just horrendous experiences at auction with dealers. You know, we really have tried to make our platform, you know, service driven. So, you know, we give them the best possible service throughout the whole transaction. You know, whether that be communication to, you know, taking care of all of the processes. You know, it goes a long way with people. And I think that, you know, 50 years ago auction, or 100 years ago dealer, that was the only way you could sell artwork, wine, watches. You know, the world's in a different place now. Commerce has completely changed to pretty much online, and you know, it's people like us that, you know, get that, and we can pass that on to vendors and buyers, and you know, ultimately get them a better deal.
And I think the other thing that's changed dramatically around that in the last, you know, 5 years even, is, you know, Christy, you were saying how people, you know, insert brand and pay, you know, sometimes 50% all in, you know, than you would if you tried to do it alone. And for a really long time, people did that because that was the only way to kind of trust what you were doing. You know, trust has always been kind of where more established brands, or, you know, the older auction houses have really lucked out, right? Because no one expects there to be an issue with provenance or authenticity, or you know, which is kind of ironic because there's just as much risk there in some of the auction world. But I think now, you know, there's a very different reputation for good, which is why transparency is so important. Like, you have to give people data. You have to be able to tell them, this is, you know, you have to be great with provenance. You have to be great with value data. You have to be, you know, the prints market again is a great market, particularly the Banksy market with pest control. Certificates of authenticity allows you to know exactly what you're buying. And that's how this platform has, you know, these platforms have been able to move forward, I think, because I don't know where authenticity is in terms of watches and wine. I mean, I imagine that's a challenge for you guys every day. Are there just strict rules and regulations that you guys adhere to?
you want to go first, Anthony, or do you want me to jump in?
Yeah, I got so many fun fake stories here. With any luxury product, right? Like when the demand outstrips the supply, counterfeiters, see the opportunity and they get to work, right? So, we do most of our buying direct from the source. So, newer vintages or futures, we buy direct from the winery, or, many wineries, they keep what they call libraries, right? Just like previous vintages that they've maybe held back from the market, that maybe at year 5 or year 10 or year, a special anniversary year, they'll start to release in the market. So we can get access to some older vintages that way. But when we do buy on the secondary, it's always a challenge, right? Because the provenance is like a he said, she said situation for most part. And there are some parties that are able to keep at least like the ledger and the cookie trail, and we're able to track it all the way back to the winery. And also many times, especially with very expensive wines, we actually give the winery a call, like, hey, this is the bottle number, this is the ID. Did you actually send it to this person, right?
Wow, that's so interesting. So, well, people will keep a track of that that trail, and I mean, if that's that it's been sold to one person and sold on to you, I guess that's easy enough, right? Because you can do exactly what you just said and call up the. But I guess if there's 2 or more jumps or people who are kind of inserted in the middle, that becomes harder. But will people keep a track of that? How will they do that?
Yeah, usually the certificate comes direct from the winery, so the first owner should keep them if they want the possibility of being able to resell without any problems. Some people don't, right? And if we don't feel 100% confident, we just won't buy it, and that does let us kind of leave some potential opportunities on the table, but it's really not a risk that we can ever take, right? Like you have one fake thing and the whole thing blows up.
You could have taken the words out of our mouths. I think this is it, isn't it? And it's you're quite right. Like we leave a lot of opportunities on the table. I'm always saying to Joe, but what if? And he's like, no. If something doesn't check out, that's why it's so important. And it sounds like provenance and paperwork is as important in the wine industry as it is in the art industry. Is it not such a, like, are there things with watches, Christy, that you can just tell? You don't need paperwork, you don't need.
Yeah, I mean that there's no like silver bullet answer to this. I think I guess what I would say is the vast majority of counterfeit watches are not trying to be real watches, they're trying to be a counterfeit watch. And so to anybody who's spent time looking at watches, and we look at a lot of watches, you just know, you can kind of look. I mean, some of them are super easy, and then some of them you'll look at and you'll go, I actually don't know what's off, but something's off. And you kind of almost your mind just goes, no, it doesn't match. And you kind of then have to work out, like, why doesn't it match? So I guess like a lot, that takes out the vast majority of it, I think. And then I think it really goes through a bunch of different filters. So one which is a really good filter is just the person who's selling it. We'll look to do background checks around particularly expensive watches, and a lot of it comes from within a watch community where people will know people, and they're all kind of connected in. So I think trusting the person and understanding the person is a great thing to look at, although they may not know, right? So even if you get a kind of a good actor, they may have bought a fake without realizing it. A lot of it then is around just the type of watch. So I think, and the type of watch, and also just like the risk profile around that. So like the value, there are some pieces that are just more counterfeited. So particularly around like vintage Rolex, there's all sorts of authenticity issues and kind of Frankensteins as well. So it's like, actually all these components are correct, but it's not, all these components are authentic, but they're not correct. So they're not actually correct for this model. They've kind of been Frankenstein and put together. But I guess fundamentally, I think, what we say is, we have watchmakers and we put things through all sorts of processes, and we check against stolen databases, and everything kind of goes through this process. I think if we're unsure, we verge on the side of we won't take it. But I think at the end of the day, it comes down to us standing by it, and it's never happened so far. But were somebody to buy a counterfeit watch off us and then turn around and go, this is a counterfeit watch, it's on us, right? Even if we paid for that, the point is that we stand by this authenticity. And so I think, you know, fundamentally that's really what matters, right? Is that it's not on the person who's buying it, it's on us, and we take great measure and we'll stand by it.
I think you've got to, and you know, we're the same. You know, we do every single possible due diligence check on every single piece of artwork and vendor, and you know, we stand over everything off for 100%. I think selling luxury goods, you have to do that, and if you're not prepared to do that, then you know, there's a red flag there for me anyway.